Hello, BookTube. Who's up for a little Thursday TBR-Torture? If I'm miserable because of this freezing cold dark weather, I might as well make you miserable too. Although TBRs don't really make us miserable, do they? They make our Amazon wish list miserable, but not we ourselves. So I have got 6 books I want to show you here. 3 of them I have read, and 3 of them I have not read. So I want to start with the 3 that I have not read, that I'll be getting to really soon, this week, before the weekend. And the first one is a kid's book. It's by Carter Goodrich, and it's called Nobody Hugs a Cactus. There is the cactus. And it's the story of a cactus named Hank, who lives in the American West, where there is nothing, where there's just chaparral and one adobe house and not much else. And he's cranky. He lives alone in his house, and according to him, that's just the way he likes it. And so everyone that passes by, like for instance Rosie the tumbleweed, passes by and says hi, but Hank wants nothing to do with her. Same thing with a tortoise. A tortoise comes creeping by one day, and Hank yells at him, "Private property, keep out!" And he's yelling. He's yelling in his little window. A jackrabbit comes by. A coyote comes by. A very long-legged and very theatrical cowboy comes by. They all say the same thing, and Hank has the same response to all of them. You know, go away. I'm perfectly happy by myself. And gradually that starts to change. Gradually he starts to feel maybe that he does want some company, that maybe he wants a hug. And I'm looking forward. I love children's picture books, absolutely love them. So I will read this. I will read it out loud, and at a nice slow pace, because in addition to loving these things on my own, I also vet them for use. I read and visit with children once a month here in Boston, and if it's a good read out loud picture book, then I'll bring it along. And you'd be surprised how few of these things are. I think it's the goal of almost all the authors of these things, but they don't seem to remember what one way or another. It's not every book that meets that criteria. So I will read this out loud at leisure. I'll try a couple of different voices. We'll see if it works out. Then the next one came out on the last day of April, so it's still within my my purview. And it sounds really interesting to me. It's by M.R. O'Connor, and it's called Wayfinding: The Science and Mystery of How Humans Navigate the World. Part travelogue and part popular science book. This is a fascinating look at how finding our way makes us human. After being led astray by a navigation application on a smartphone, the author started to pay attention to anecdotes about other GPS incidents from friends or reported in the news, including a very famous incident that took place where someone was led hundreds of miles out of the way. But there have also been cases where people drove off docks into water because they were paying more attention to their navigation device than they were to whether or not it was actually leading them anywhere. As a science journalist, the author began to wonder whether there are unintended cognitive consequences to outsourcing our innate navigation skills to a device, and she began to dig deeper into the fields of neuroscience, psychology, anthropology, biology, religion, and natural history to learn as much as she could about the traditions and importance of navigation. And that sounds fascinating to me, not least for a personal reason, right? Because I have done a lot of traveling. I am done with traveling now, but I did a lot of traveling, and I never used a map. And it was long before there was any GPS, so this is naturally of interest to me. And also, I have to point out, I know this is not any reflection on the book itself, but I'm kind of shallow. I have to point out that the author has just about the best author photo that I have ever seen, and certainly that I've seen this year. See if you can make it out. That is the author's photo. Those are her eyes, and in the background are some of her friends who are pulling her sled. And then the third one that I have not read yet, that I'll be reading right away, is this one. It's by a United States Senator named Tom Cotton, and it is Sacred Duty, a soldier's tour of Arlington National Cemetery. Those of you who maybe are not American, we have a giant military national cemetery in the United States called Arlington National Cemetery, a somber place, really sacred ground. And this author that is our author. Let me read you his biography. His biography is nothing to sneeze at. He's a United States Senator from Arkansas. He served in Iraq with the 101st Airborne Division and in Afghanistan with a provincial reconstruction team. Between combat tours, he served with the United States Army's 3rd Infantry Regiment at Arlington National Cemetery. His military decorations include the Bronze Star, the Combat Infantryman Badge, and the Ranger Tab. He served 1 term in the House of Representatives before election to the Senate. A graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, he is married and has 2 sons. That's pretty impressive. And I have read many histories of Arlington National Cemetery, many profiles of it and some of the people who are in it. I've also walked every inch of its grounds, and I have a fairly vested interest in it. If you know anything about Arlington National Cemetery, if you particularly know the only 2 U.S. presidents who are buried there, then it won't be a surprise to you that I have a deep interest in the place. And I haven't read this, so I will give it a try. It won't be more than an hour to do. And then I want to give you 3 books that I have read and that I recommend. The first one is a romance. We saw it on this channel, and I was expecting something by the numbers. I don't hold that as a criticism of romance. Romance is often by the numbers. Genre fiction, just in general, usually is. I don't hold that as a criticism at all. If you're working in the corset of a genre where you have to tick boxes, then the fact that you do not refuse to tick boxes doesn't count for anything. If I know you have to do that for the genre that you're writing in, then I look elsewhere for whether or not you're doing something good. I look for the energy. I look for the inventiveness. I look for the intelligence. And boy, oh boy, did this book surprise me. I know I have read this author before, but not like this. This jumped right out at me. This is a book in the Reluctant Royals series. It's by Alyssa Cole, and it's called A Prince on Paper. And let me read it again, just in case you didn't catch it the first time I talked about it. Naya Jarami fled Thesolo. That's an African country where her father was a minister of finance, who was convicted not only of corruption, but of poisoning. She fled Thesolo for the glitz and glamour of New York City, but discovered that her Prince Charming exists only in her virtual dating games. Those are virtual dating games she plays where there's a group of princes, and there's a set menu of responses that you can have, whether or not you want to spurn them or lead them on or fall in love with them or whatever. When Naya returns home for a royal wedding, she accidentally finds herself up close and personal in bed with a real-life celebrity prince she loves to hate. For Johann von Braustein, the red-headed step-prince of Lichtenberg, acting as a paparazzi bait is a ruse that protects his brother, the heir to the throne, and his own heart. When a royal referendum threatens his brother's future, a fake engagement is the perfect way to keep the cameras on him. So you see, he's as is usual with romances like this, the bad boy is not what he appears to be. But in this case, it's not that the world misunderstands him. It's that he wants the world to misunderstand him. He wants to be the lightning rod, the Prince Harry to Prince William. He wants to be the lightning rod for the world's attention to get it off the back of his brother, who has presumably more important things to do. Naya and Johann both have good reasons to avoid love, but as desires are laid bare behind palace doors, they must decide if their fake romance will lead to happily ever after. And that does sound fairly conventional, but boy, oh boy. The thing that blew me away, and it blew me away right from the first chapter of this book, in addition to a noticeable quality of prose. This author really knows how to write. But the thing that blew me away right from the beginning is how deftly Alyssa Cole draws Naya's background and the background of her whole nation. It's done in incredibly confident, minimalist brushstrokes that are nevertheless amazing. It's a whole nother world, and I read lots and lots of romance novels. I especially read lots of Regency romance novels, and when you read lots of Regency romance novels, you are very much in the same world all the time. The first few decades of the 19th century, and in England, almost always in England. I've read a few in Ireland and one or two in Venice, but mostly it's all in England. So having this, not only contemporary, smartphones and dating apps and whatnot, but also such a different setting, such a different world where the vicious infighting of African politics, which can make for very colorful reading, is side by side with the vicious infighting of royalty. With those two worlds are side by side. Naya's friend and cousin is going to be royal, is going to rule Tesolo. But her father was a finance minister and had almost equal power. And she is never drawn by half measures. She is just a wonderful character. I can't quite say that about Prince Johann, I'm afraid to say. I can't quite say that about him. This is not a meeting of equals as far as these two characters go, but she is worth reading the book on her own. So you're going to see this in your new bookstores. This is out, I think, now. It's very enjoyable. If you like romance novels and you're looking maybe for, like I was but didn't know that I was, if you're looking for maybe a shot of something a little different, try this. You won't be sorry. Then the next one that I have already read, I read an advanced copy and then I read the finished copy. I was very impressed and I was not expecting to be. Now I have the trade paperback. I'm going to read it one last time. I've mentioned on this channel, that's the cycle of things. Since I don't have access at the moment to a really good remainder bookstore, then the cycle is I read the first draft, I read the advanced copy, the ARC, at a shot to get impressions, watch for any burrs that stick up right away. Then a little bit later I get the finished copy, the hardcover, and I read that slower and with much more consideration. I read that not hungrily as a reader, but rather thinking, okay, I read every book this way as if I'm going to review it. I only review a fraction of the ones I get. I only have so many hours in the day. But even so, when that finished copy comes, then I settle down with the work now that my first impression is over, and I pay attention to it, pencil in hand, as though I am going to review it. And then, half a year later, sometimes longer than that with histories or biographies, I get the paperback. And that is sort of a farewell read. I'd give it one last read and then I let it go. Then years could pass, a half a decade could pass. I might find a used copy at a flea market, something down the line, and think, it's been a long time, I might read this again. But this is the final step in that process for this book. This is by Lisa Brennan Jobs, and it's small fry in trade paperback. Now, this trade paperback comes, unlike the hardcover that I read, or the advanced copy, this comes festooned in blurbs from everybody under the sun, because my initial impression of this book was later seconded by the critical world. This is a memoir of the daughter of Steve Jobs, of Apple fame. And it's the exact opposite of what you would expect from a celebrity memoir, from, unfortunately, the majority of celebrity memoirs. It's brutally honest, it's wonderfully written, and it will make you squirm a little. It is just a remarkable feat of self-examination. I was very gratified. When I read it, it blew me away. I wasn't expecting that at all. And then I was very gratified to see the rest of the critical world notice the same things. You take this, you stuff it into your bag if you're visiting the newsroom for a few books that may be of interest to you. You stuff this in your bag with a couple of other things, and then you go through them. Maybe distracted with kids or a cat or whatever later that night or that weekend. And you hope that all of them will grab at you, will actually stop you in what you're doing, so that you'll say, oh, that is really good. Many is the time. Well, I am not that kind of freelancer anymore. I do this all the time. I do only that. But I was that kind of freelancer many times for many years. And too often, nothing in that shoulder bag actually grabs at you. Instead, you are faced with a much worse alternative of looking at the things that didn't grab you and thinking, well, what can I make of this? None of this grabbed me. All of this is fairly rote. It's fairly by the numbers, but I got to be out there talking to editors about this stuff. I got to make a case for some of this. What can I do with this? These two might go together. This one's attached to an anniversary. Maybe an editor will be interested in it for that reason or whatever. There is some worth in doing that, especially when the books reveal greater quality later on down the line when you're really plowing through them for a review. But what you really want is for something to grab you, just grab you forcibly without you expecting it. And that happened with this, and it must have happened with other reviewers as well. So this is covered in blurbs, but I want to visit with it again. I want to read it one more time, and then I will let it go. So that is the second thing that I've already read. And then the third thing we've seen on this channel And this is the finished copy, and I finally got to it. I think this comes out later this month. Yeah, this comes out on May the 14th. And this is Alison Weir, Anna of Cleves. The subtitle is The Princess in the Portrait. This is the latest in Alison Weir's series of books, or historical novels about each of the wives of Henry VIII. Now, I don't particularly like that approach, whether it's a series of novels or a biography. There have been 80 million biographies of King Henry VIII that are really just stories about him and his wives. This is a guy who revamped the English throne, revamped the English civil service structure, went to war, did a whole bunch of other things, and lived a long time on the throne. And it's possible that you could write a long biography of Henry without mentioning his wives, except as they impinge on royal policy. I've never seen that done. Instead, they're such luridly great tales that people just stick with them. Historians just stick with them, and so do novelists. So I don't like the framework, and the framework invites itself to give us an unrecognizable Henry. I don't believe that King Henry VIII, one of the most studied and storied and written about figures in Western history, I don't believe he's ever yet been completely accurately conveyed in either a biography or a novel. It's too tempting to portray him as a quickly degenerating, bloodthirsty maniac. That is too tempting, and so people do it. Historians and novelists do it. Unfortunately, we have ample historical record about Henry, ample letters, ample documents of all kinds. I think it is clear beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was not crazy. He may have done things that seem psychopathic to the 21st century, but I believe he has been misserved. Let's just put it that way, especially by novelists. So I went into this fearing the worst, not only for that, but also because I don't like the lavish interest. Why devote 6 years of your life to such well-trod ground? Nevertheless, Alison Weir has often pleased me as a writer of both fiction and nonfiction, and I was never going to ignore a series like this, of course. I read and reviewed the Catherine of Aragon book. I read and reviewed the Anne Boleyn book. I read and reviewed the Jane Seymour book, and now we're up to wife number 4, Anne of Cleves, who was a German princess, a small principality, put forward vigorously by reformist elements in Henry's court. And the subtitle of this novel, The Princess in the Portrait, comes from the fact that Henry sent Hans Holbein, his great painter, to draw her portrait. There was no Instagram. There was no Snapchat then. Henry had to know what she looked like, and he wasn't going to make the trip by himself. That was a huge rigmarole. So he sent Holbein to paint her. And Holbein painted a demure, beautiful little portrait. Just of a beautiful, thoughtful, demure princess-type creature. And Henry was enraptured by the portrait. If you see it in a museum, you'll be enraptured by it too. But it didn't look anything like her. Even in a contemplative moment, it didn't look anything like her. And when they agreed and the betrothal was on, and Henry put on a ludicrously transparent disguise and went to see her when she arrived in England, and was immediately brought up face to face with the reality, which is that she was not an attractive young woman. She most certainly did not look like that. Most certainly did not. That looks maybe a little like Henry's daughter, Elizabeth, looked when she was that age. Maybe a little. But that doesn't look anything like Anne of Cleves like that. And Henry quickly got rid of her. But he didn't have her imprisoned or exiled or beheaded or anything like that. Instead, he declared that he couldn't marry her, and declared that she was, in fact, his sister in the law. He gave her a very generous pension, gave her a very nice house, and just let her live in England. She certainly didn't want to go back home, and that's what happened. So in many ways, she is the most enigmatic of Henry's wives. She outlived him, she outlived the whole of the Tudor era almost, and all in complete comfort and solitude. Just a complete, not solitude, she had all sorts of intellectual and clerical visitors coming and going all the time. Henry seemed to make a willful decision not to dislike her, not to be jealous, not to rancor, not to begrudge or penny pinch at all. It's a totally different side of him, really worthy of a big study. I don't think there has ever been a book this long that is a biography of Anne of Cleves, and that's a shame, because I bet there are records to find. to ransack that no one's ever used in an English language book. I don't think that's true. If you know of one, let me know. But I think this is by far the longest novel that's ever been written about her. Other people have done this, have done The Wives of Henry VIII. I think this is the longest one, although maybe Jean Plaidy wrote 2. If she wrote 2 and they are combined in one, they might be longer than this, but I don't think so. I think Anne of Cleves was one of her 1-volume Henry Wives. But anyway, this it's by far the best of Alison Weir's novels about the wives of Henry VIII, and it is really good about the nest of religious and political intrigue that Anna was coming out of in order to come to England. And it's also very good in the long period of her life after Henry's dead. So I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, I think, more than any of the other books. We have 2 more wives to go. We have The Disaster with Catherine Howard, and we have the truly enigmatic Catherine Parr. But this is worth your time. And this will also be, unless you're a real dyed-in-the-wool Tudor aficionado, this will be showing you parts of that reign that you didn't know in great detail. One of the nice things about historical novels written by historians is that the facts tend to hold up well. They will move things around. They'll move furniture around to help their plot, but they're a lot warier about that than just a straight-up novelist would be. And I interviewed Alison Weir, had a good interview with her. That and my review will run on Open Letters sometime, in May. But I do think that this is worth your time. If you're a Tudor fiction completist, you'll read it anyway. But even so, I think it's worth your time to try this one. And that's it. That is a Thursday TBR-Torture. So we have Anne of Cleves, an Anne of Cleves novel by Alison Weir, the historian and biographer. We have Small Fry by Lisa Brennan Jobs in paperback now in your bookstore. We have A Prince on Paper by Alyssa Cole. Boy, oh boy, what a romance. Then we have Sacred Duty by Tom Cotton, Senator Tom Cotton, about Arlington National Cemetery. We have Wayfinding by M.R. O'Connor, about how humans navigate and whether or not they're hurting themselves by letting that all be done accurately by computer or inaccurately. And Nobody Hugs a Cactus. This is by Carter Goodrich. And it's about a cactus who starts out by thinking that maybe he doesn't want anybody to hug him. I have a feeling he's going to be proven wrong. But anyway, that's it for your TBR-Torture. But I will be back. Plenty more to talk about. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.